Moving on, the Army is returning Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl to active duty after years in Taliban captivity and only weeks after being released. Officials say he will be assigned administrative duties at the headquarters of U.S. Army North at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Meanwhile, the Army is continuing to probe into the circumstances of his disappearance from his base in Afghanistan. He is said to have deserted his post. The Taliban released him in a trade for 5 of its commanders held at the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Well, leading with honor, leadership lessons from the Hanoi Hilton, retired Colonel Lee Ellis discusses how American military leaders inspired commitment to the mission as POWs in Vietnam. He has a first-hand experience as a Vietnam POW, and he joins us now from Atlanta, Georgia. Colonel Ellis, welcome to Arise America. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Hello.
And I know that you had a harrowing experience during the Vietnam War. That was many years ago, but you can relate, at least in some ways, to the experience possibly that Bowe Bergdahl has gone through. Sort of walk us through, help us understand what the reintegration process is like.
Well, the most important thing is being free again, and when you have freedom, you have the opportunity to make decisions. I remember when we came home, the most difficult thing for me was just making everyday decisions, going to the store, and there was so many variety of things, 10 different varieties of soap or whatever you were trying to buy. Just making those little decisions was just a new experience for me again, and it was somewhat stressful, but obviously being free was so exciting that overcame any stress associated with it. Of course, reuniting with my family was a huge part of it. That was the biggest part. I was single, not married, and that was a big plus for me, I think. I didn't have to worry about that. But being back with my parents and my brother and his family, and just being back in the USA where things that we understand how life goes, and it was just a great experience coming back.
How long was your reintegration process? We know that Sergeant Bergdahl, it's been 6 weeks since he was released, and now he's back to regular duty. Are you surprised by this time frame?
A little bit. I took about 3 months off. They gave us as much as we wanted, and I was ready to go back at 3 months. It just seemed like a reasonable amount of time to do some vacationing, spend some time with my family, kind of get readjusted. Now, during that 3 months, we did have some work. We went through 2 weeks of debriefs. We went through a rebluing for the Air Force folks. I'm sure the Navy and Marine Corps had similar programs, but they brought us up to date on all the things that had happened while we were gone. But by that time, I was really ready to go back to work, and the Air Force provided me the opportunity to get requalified for flying. That was my life dream, and it was just getting started, so I went back to the cockpit, I got requalified, I went back to work. I think the most important thing is to kind of get settled in and get to work where you've got a routine every day, you've got a mission, something that you're interested in doing, and just put your head down and go to work and work hard. And that's what I did. I think most all my peers did that, and I think that suited us very well.
Yeah, that seems to make sense. But just as you just acknowledged, this very short time frame since his release, after being in captivity for 5 years, seems so short. But the Army has cleared him for regular duty, although he's been assigned to what amounts to a desk job. But why do you think he's been returned to regular duty, active duty, so quickly? How does this serve the Army, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm wondering if they didn't do that as much for his protection, because it gives him a structured environment. And right now, he may need a structured environment where he has to be at a certain place at a certain time every day. There's real value in that in all of our lives, but I think especially when you've been away that long. And he was a little bit younger, I think, than I was when I was captured. I had already turned 24, came home almost 30, and a lot older and more disciplined, I think, and all the great leadership training that we had the benefit of in those 5.5 years that he didn't. Even though I was the youngest guy in the camp, I was experiencing some tremendous leadership lessons every day carried out by some very courageous leaders that helped me kind of realize who I was and who I wanted to be. Those role models really helped me to grow up and mature. So I came home a much more mature and stable person than actually I was before I was shot down. I was pretty pretty happy-go-lucky fighter pilot before I was captured.
Yeah, I would imagine it does change you in some important ways. You mentioned that you took that 3 months off to be with your family. What we do believe, or what's been reported, is that Bowe Bergdahl has had no communication with his family. What do you make of that?
You know, that is the strangest thing. I don't know what to make of it, because we called home within 12 hours or so of we landed in the Philippines when we came out of Hanoi at the end of the war. So, and we called home again the next day, and then 2 days later we flew back into the U.S., continental U.S., and met with our families and had 2 or 3 days with them before they went back home, and we stayed in the hospital and had physical exams and treatments and debriefing and all that. So it's been a real big surprise for me that he has not had contact with his family. I don't know what's driving that. I don't know if that's his parents, or whether it's Bowe, or whether that's the military. I doubt if I don't think the military would hold him back. So I think it has to be from the family.
Yeah, it really is odd. I'm sure some of these details will come out with time. Just take us a little bit back to your experience. And so clearly you are an example. Senator John McCain and so many others are examples that you can come back from a harrowing experience like this, being a POW for 5 years, and have a successful and productive life. But how did that experience change your worldview, change your mindset? Were you disillusioned at all through that experience?
Well, I wouldn't say I was disillusioned. I was very excited to come home, and I believed very strongly in my country while I was there. I believed in my family. We had faith in family, country, God. Those kind of things were very important to us. I wouldn't say I was disillusioned. I was a little bit caught off guard, I would say, by the cultural changes that happened in the late 60s. If you'll remember, I went down in 67, came home in 1973. So during that period of time, our culture changed probably more rapidly than any other period in history. So that caught me off guard. When I went overseas, I'm from a little town of 3,000 people in Commerce, Georgia, actually on a farm, but that's where I went to school. And when I went over, there were no drugs in the high school, or none in the city we knew of at all. When I came home, there were drugs in the middle school. So the culture changed very rapidly. There was a lot of the breakdown in the structure, which in some ways was good, but overall there were some problems with it, I think, when property was destroyed and that sort of thing. So there have been a lot of changes, some disappointments there. Some good things happened, some disappointments. I think we're all a little bit disillusioned by the late 60s and early 70s, but we had to grow out of that, and I think we have. We've seen a lot of good things come over the last 30, 40 years, and the one thing I will say is that, I did idealize certain things. You remember only the good parts, like family, and I wanted them to be perfect, and I came home, and even though they had done a wonderful job, and I was so proud of them, that they weren't perfect, or, my friends weren't perfect, and of course I wasn't either, but I'd remembered them that way, and that was a little disappointment. Just in retrospect, I can see, the fallacy of all that.
Sure. I want to get to a couple things before I have to let you go.
Okay.
First of all, what about some of your peers, some of your fellow airmen? Did you see any of them who had been POWs struggle to get back into their lives and to reintegrate, if you will?
I would say out of the 520 or so of us that were in the Hanoi system, which was mostly air crews, most of us came home and went very well, reintegrated back into the culture, went to work, had very good lives. Some of them got married within 6 months, and now they've been married almost 41 years. So it's been a very good thing. I got married a year later, and I've been married 40 years very happily, and so we've had that experience. But there were a few. I'm talking about 1% maybe, or 2%. But you would have that in any population that would have some difficulties.
Right. And very briefly, if you could give Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl any advice, what would you tell him?
Do your duty, be a good citizen, have a good attitude, go to work every day on time, ready to go to work, and just prove that you're a good man and can do your job. That's the best thing any of us can do, but I think certainly in his situation.
Very sage advice indeed. Retired Colonel Lee Ellis, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
You too. Thank you.